Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Khorasan and the Khorasanis. Today we are in Kathmandu's Garden of Dreams in the Tamil district. So, entering into this beautiful urban garden, this neoclassically designed garden, there's a quote from Omar Khayyam. Now, from one of his poems from the Rubaiyat, translated from Fitzgerald. Now, I had read that there were a number of Omar Khayyam quotes scattered throughout the gardens. I only found that one at the very entrance. There may be others. I haven't really been looking carefully. But I just wanted to do a quick little video about Omar Khayyam and relate it to Khorasan and Khorasanis, because Omar Khayyam is a Khorasani. He was born in the region, and he's from Nishapur in modern-day Iran, which was at that time part of the Greater Seljuk Empire. And this is around the time of the First Crusades. He was born in the, in the 11th century, and he died in the 12th century. He's a controversial figure. He's one of the great polymaths of the Ummah. Meaning he's a Renaissance man. He was masterful in many different fields, and in the various golden eras of Islam we find a number of men and women who are masterful in many different areas of arts and sciences. Omar Khayyam, his name means tent maker, so he likely came from a tent making family originally. He was masterful in mathematics, in astronomy, I believe in jurisprudence. He was a philosopher, and he's known as a poet, although his poetic corpus is questioned by many scholars because they aren't sure that he actually wrote the poems himself. And like many poems and sayings in the past, a poem or a saying would be attributed to somebody famous who had a positive reputation in certain areas. And this has been going on since ancient times all around the world, where there are sayings attributed to, say, Confucius, or to Muhammad, peace be upon him, or to Jesus, peace be upon him, or any number of people that are religious or philosophical masters, spiritual masters. And this may have happened to Omar Khayyam. His poetry, I first encountered his poetry in a translation of the Rubaiyat, like maybe when I was in my early 20s, when I was first being exposed to Sufi literature. As I was studying world religions, I started reading everything I could get my hands on from Rumi, from Jalaluddin Rumi, Maulana. And then and then he pointed me toward the Quran, so I started reading translations or interpretations of the Quran and everything I could find about the Sufi tradition. So I came across this little thin volume from purportedly written by Omar Khayyam, and it uses a lot of Sufi symbolism, a lot of discussion about the drinking of wine and the cupbearer, and things that, if you're familiar with Sufi literature, you find again and again, but that are not to be taken literally. When the Sufis talk about getting drunk at the tavern, they aren't talking about literally sipping fermented grape juice. They're talking about spiritual experiences of moving into enlightenment, experiencing enlightenment, ecstasy, bliss, drawing near to Allah, drawing near to the truth. There are various ways of interpreting it. So perhaps you could interpret Omar Khayyam in that way, but many people interpreted him as actually speaking in a very literal way, and that he was using the Sufis and Sufi terminology as a way to disguise his thinking. He's been accused by Muslims and non-Muslims of being an atheist, a materialist, a free thinker. In older times, he was accused of being a Zoroastrian or influenced by them, which then led to a modern resurgence in the 19th and 20th century, where many people who speak Farsi, Dari, found his thoughts and his poetry and other writings to be beneficial, and inspiring, and he had a tremendous impact on a lot of Western intellectuals and Irani intellectuals, from my understanding. Now, it's also, I read that he was actually quite despised by many Sufis who wanted to disassociate themselves from him. And among them would be Shamsuddin Tabrizi, one of the teachers of Rumi, his enlightener. Another, I read that Attar was not a big fan of Omar Khayyam. So he wasn't met with universal acclaim in his own time. I read that people were not really quoting his poetry until much later, which is one of the reasons that people think maybe he didn't write that he didn't write those verses. He considered himself to be a student of Avicenna, of Ibn Sina, the great Muslim philosopher and physician, the great healer. And so he was apparently, Omar Khayyam was studying his works very early on. I could imagine if I could read Persian, I could read Farsi, I would love to read Ibn Sina. Also, like before drawing this to a close, I'm not an expert about Omar Khayyam by any means, but I find it interesting that he's part of a Renaissance movement of polymaths, and that's part of what, when I'm reading Khorasan and the Khorasanis, I'm not thinking about any political or military movement, actually. I'm thinking about people who are deep on the path of enlightenment, who are seeking to cultivate their minds and expand their hearts, and people that are traditionally labeled as Sufis, but maybe do not actually fit within the Sufi movement proper. Also, people involved in various aspects of healing and intellectual endeavor, the arts and the sciences. People that are seeking to become spiritually and overall mature humans. These I see as a very possible reading of Khorasan and the Khorasanis, maintaining our genetic integrity, developing our minds and our mental apparatus, our intellectual and creative apparatus, expanding our hearts to be able to contain all of creation. So one of the things I need to mention about Omar Khayyam is that he spent time at Balkh, which is the heart of Khorasan. He also spent time up at Samarkand in Uzbekistan, and he studied at the great library there, the Ark, which is I love great libraries and I love places of learning, and he was always going and seeking out knowledge, and I respect that about the man. I haven't studied him enough to agree with him or disagree with him on any particular points about theology or philosophy, etc. But I do really respect his voracious hunger for learning, and his openness to study many different traditions. And so he was poring over the volumes that were available at the library at the Ark, this great fortress in Uzbekistan. And he was a great traveler. Apparently he was being questioned about his religiosity and his sincerity as a Muslim, and so some people are skeptical about why he went on pilgrimage, but he went on a pilgrimage, and then apparently after the pilgrimage he kind of withdrew into more of an isolated existence in his town of Nishapur, if I'm remembering correctly. And this is where you will find his mausoleum, his tomb, his grave, which, so he's considered to be, although, like I said, it's controversial, he would be ranked as one of the more well-known Muslim poets and thinkers within not only the Western context, but the worldwide context. And so I think that it's worthwhile to look into his thinking more. He's very important within astronomy and mathematics and the sciences and philosophy. So, and the places he's associated with, the Seljuk capital of Nishapur and Samarkand, are associated with many great scholars and thinkers. I believe Al-Farabi, I don't know about Al-Kindi. But anyway, if you could put into comments if you are more knowledgeable about these things, but about who he was influenced by and who he influenced in turn. that would be very fascinating. I do know that one of his major influences was Ibn Sina, and that's another thinker that I would like to explore more of his works in the future to better understand Islam in its various expressions as kind of a civilization that has the potential to encourage the greatest explorations and expressions of intellectual and creative expansion and depth. So I'll go ahead and bring that to a close, but please consider that Khorasan and the Khorasanis in prophecy may not be exactly what you have thought it to be. And that while we should always consider the literal, the plain reading, we should never be stuck on that, because a literal plain reading is often a trap. And we need to go beyond that and to look at other ways of understanding what Khorasan is and who the Khorasanis are historically. So we need to think about, what are the Khorasanis known for? What did they do? And I see that there were many high-level polymaths, intellects, mystics, poets, architects, people deep on the path of enlightenment, and there was a continuity, not just from the Persian expression of expressions of Islam, but also from and beyond, but also from much earlier than that, going back to ancient Bactria, to ancient Eastern Persia, and the Silk Road expressions from East Asia, connecting Western Eurasia or West Asia, in the Middle East and Anatolia, all the way out to China and Japan, and then down into South and Southeast Asia, down into the Middle East and into the Nile Valley and the northern coastline of Africa. All these places were very interconnected, and we need to think about what is a Khorasani. I would argue at this point a working definition is that a Khorasani is a man or woman of heart and reason, which, so intuitive reason's very important, and we need to engage in intellectual endeavors and spiritual endeavors and practices as we open space for the intuitive reason to arise, often through what I call sejdic synthesis. So anyway, until next time, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.